You should get a little notification. Does it say we're live yet?
Yeah. Yes.
Right, so we have a special guest, Cynthia, and she knows a bit about MBTI. And yep. And Jeff here. And I'm just going to put the slides on. And so I'm just going to start them. And so, Jeff, over to you for the little synopsis thingy.
For the very long, detailed explanation of the episode.
Yeah.
It says, Mann poses as Eve's dying brother to investigate the death of a doctor who was the only hope for a terminally ill cryonics scientist.
That's it. Probably.
Yeah, and as I confess I didn't quite get that aspect of it at first. I think by the second or third time they sort of were explaining it after it was giving away his plot later in the episode. It made a little bit more sense, but I liked this character, Mikey.
Yeah, I thought you might.
He was kind of fun.
Which character
Anyway.
was Mikey?
I think she's that one. I'll just pause. I think she's probable ISTP, Jeff.
I don't know. Don't ask me. It's hard enough to do the typing on the regular characters. It's another thing to have random guest people.
Well, stereotypically, in terms of like she likes fixing stuff and she seems like an artisan.
Okay.
Or we could say that she enacts the role of the crafter.
Anyway, so just to sort of continue a brief summary,
Yeah.
I would say that for the nth time, we had Bobby and Eve pretend to be other people to sort of get their way into something, to sort of out somebody in a situation. And in this case, it was less clear from the beginning who that was going to be because there was sort of clues that might have been multiple people. And as it turns out, it seemed like everybody except for the guy they sort of came off to be the creepiest ended up being involved in it. He was played by him right there. It was played by William Sanderson, otherwise known as Larry from Newhart, without his brother Daryl or his other brother Daryl. Anyway, so yeah, pretty much everybody else seemed to be in on the deal, which was they were in debt, so they were trying to. The head of the place, faked his own death in order to try to bring about a bunch of money into the place.
Yeah.
He was going to have a triumphant return and say that his stuff worked. And then the other scientists, like the actual brains behind the operation, wanted to actually save his life, even though he wasn't actually terminally ill. And so they had to get rid of him. So they had this other guy do it. But anyway, It's about as convoluted as it sounds. But go ahead.
Yeah. I like that that scientist character, and it was almost when he says, "Oh, I know what you are," and it just sort of left it where he might have rumbled her as a fembot, but it's sort of left unclear. But it's like because before we'd had scientists like that, and they turn out to be a baddie, but this was a sort of a neutral character.
Yeah, and they also had him in the promo saying things in a kind of creepy way. So they sort of portrayed it as if he was suspicious.
Oh.
And then the twist is basically he's the only one who's not.
And so this continues a trend. English villain, but this time a woman. I think it's the third English villain.
Well, those untrustworthy English people.
Yeah, it was one of those 1990s trends. English villain. In American programs. Right. What else? So, and then there was the... did they do that in...
Why are these images popping up?
Why are they popping up? Because I've got a slide.
Oh,
thing, and it automatic... I'm not sort of busy there with the clicker. I have it on automatic change. I can vary the interval, if you like. And
no, it's fine.
So, Jeff, in Back to the Future, when they went to the future, did they do a little different thing with the fashion, with the collar? I can't remember what they did, but here you've got this thing with the collar being up. I just wondered if like they'd done something similar to another thing where it was sort of set in the near future, and it's sort of maybe they did that on Wild Palms, which was made a year later. Something with the collar going up a bit. Anyway, so I digress. I'll let the things move forward. So all this, I mentioned at the time to Cynthia that that the all of the stuff with the Jeff, I was just going to mention Doctor Who the movie, TV movie from 1996, when they did something very similar.
Did Jeff disappear?
Do something similar to what?
Do you remember when they had Paul McGann and he was in the morgue and they had the guy watching a Frankenstein movie?
Oh, no, I've never actually seen that all the way through.
Oh, is it okay if I tell you that bit that's near the start?
I mean, you don't have to tell me, but if you think it is relevant to the review, then by all means.
Yeah, I think it's relevant to the review because that Doctor Who movie, TV movie that was shown in 1996, in about May 1996, they had a sequence where the Doctor regenerated from Sylvester McCoy into Paul McGann, and when he was in the morgue, and you had sort of a guy working in the morgue, and he was watching television, and he was watching one of those old Universal Frankenstein movies from like the 1930s, and there was that clip when Frankenstein's monster awakes, and he says, "It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!" And then at the same time, that is where there's the regeneration into Paul McGann, and he opens the door, and he's there, and he's alive, and then the guy faints because it's that, and they showed the two things in parallel: Frankenstein's monster coming alive, and the Doctor getting up off the slab. And they did the same thing in this, but this was before that, of paralleling the action of watching the movie and then it being paralleled in the action of the show. And then something else I remember hearing, that Robert Holmes would sort of like take some of those movies from the 1930s and have some equivalent storylines, some of those features in those 1970s Doctor Who's. Some of those elements, like say the brain of Morbius, maybe. So yeah, and I thought the sets were very good, but based on what I could see. And I was about to say, it's because it's NBC Universal, they own the rights to those movies, and so they could show that old footage from those 1930s movies. Because I remember that being a point when I was reading about the Doctor Who TV movie. I remember Cynthia laughing, being amused. Not like a belly laugh kind of thing, but she was amused at times.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were gonna elaborate, Cynthia. I thought you were gonna like go into a moment there where you might speak. So
I don't.
we're all three of us are having problems saying things about this episode. I like that guy, and he was written as like a guy who was attracted towards Eve, but he wasn't like a lech about it, and he's so he was well written. I mean, and we've had some other characters not as well written. So I thought this scientist was well written. what else? And then the thing was the plot was it was quite convoluted. There was the essential point of that was it. Someone faking their own death for the insurance, and then saying, but they were brought back to life with this technology in order to sort of get around it. But that was the plan. Otherwise, the person who faked their own death would have to pretend to be dead. It wouldn't be able to go out in public and that sort of thing.
I think he said something about like coming back, because they were trying to sell the cryogenic thing. So he was trying to be like, well, he was dead, but he was cryogenically preserved, and so he's come back. So I don't think it was as much about insurance as it was just trying to make money off the scheme. Oh, okay. Because I could be wrong, but that's what it seemed like he was saying. And I can't remember that actor's name. I guess I could look it up. But the main thing I remember him from was another short-lived TV show. I think it had more episodes than Man and Machine, but I don't remember exactly how many. But the show TV 101 that aired on CBS in the late 80s. I can find out pretty quick.
What was it about? Interesting title, TV 101.
It was about basically a broadcast journalism class, Leon Russum, that's his name, where they did a daily TV news broadcast for the school in high school. So, and several actors that went on to become better known for other things were on that show, like Matt LeBlanc, and who was on Friends that you mentioned earlier.
What are you doing, Ben?
I'm just rubbing the notes. I thought no, perfectly innocent.
No.
Right, here we go.
I know. I thought that's what I imagined you doing, but yeah.
So it was funny seeing Leon Russum playing this other guy because I recorded one of the episodes of TV 101, speaking of VHS recordings at the time, and I watched the same scenes from that so many times that I memorized the dialogue. And so when I see him, I like hear him saying those lines from that show. Like, we have confiscated another piece of contraband. But I have to say that I even though I don't remember seeing him in a lot of things, in this and Man and Machine, he was a very different character. So my opinion of his acting skills went up because I just saw him playing somebody. Anytime I see an actor where they play a very different character and do it well, then it sort of, my estimation of them goes up a little bit because I see they've got some range. And as we've talked about before, there are some actors that pretty much play the same kind of role all the time because they're just really good at playing that role, and others because they're not very good. So it depends on that. But then you have other people that we've talked about that have played very different characters and brought something different to each role. So anyway, so in the limited time that I've seen Leon Russum, he's done a good job of being very different from them. Because his role on TV 101 was the principal, and he was this kind of like stuffy, full of himself guy, which I guess this guy was a little bit, but this guy was much more like sort of eccentric, whereas the other guy was much more kind of ISTJ, boring kind of guy. So,
yeah.
Not that I'm saying all ISTJs are boring. I'm just saying he was in that mold. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I suppose the stereotype in England would be the train spotter. And I suppose in America it would be like the baseball nerd. Oh, there's a random image from something else.
Well, it did have, at least on my copy that I got from that YouTube playlist, the very first few seconds of the show, I heard the Simpsons theme song. So
Ah,
had that at the very beginning also. Somebody was obviously some VHS audio spillage or whatever you want to call it.
right. So I will. Let's see what happens here. Oh, there we go. And then I'm going to go back to the. I'll go back to the slides. See if the stimulators. Which usually what happens is Jeff will see something and. So Jeff, should we review the series as a whole?
Yeah, I thought about that because it's probably not worth doing a whole video just for that since it was only 9 episodes long. But
Yeah, what was sort of Eve's lesson from this episode? I can't quite remember.
it's a good question. We probably had that reviewed in that part at the end that was cut off. Because obviously what they talked about was sort of the fears related to death and knowledge of death and the idea of people or creatures coming back to life and that sort of thing. So the Frankenstein elements.
Yeah, and then there was a bit about there might have been a bit of subtext in that she wasn't that afraid of death, and then she was in like that freezing thing, and again she like one of those times where she wasn't quite, that she went sort of like INTP in that she wasn't aware of her circumstances, and then she thought about it for, I might as well break out of here. It's getting rather cold and I'm freezing up. Because there's that sort of attitude that she has of, I can't be destroyed, I can be rebuilt, and then it was, I could be impeded by this freezing.
Yeah, I never actually saw the movie RoboCop, but I saw clips of it, and wasn't there a scene very similar to that where he comes out of either something where he's cold or wet or something? I was thinking there was something like that that it was sort of similar to, but
it's a good movie, Jeff. RoboCop. I'd buy that for $1.
Well, it's one of those movies where, see, you gotta understand, like we've talked about this before, that when I was a kid, my parents were very strict about what I was allowed to see and not see, and so that came out at a time where it was an R-rated movie, and I wasn't allowed to see that. And so it wasn't until many years later that I probably had access to it, and then I just wasn't interested. So,
there was a good bit when he. Can I say a good bit in the movie? Because you say you're not interested, so it probably doesn't mind if I spoil it.
Go ahead.
It's just a silly joke where he blows his hand off and he says, "Give the man a hand," and that's when they track down RoboCop at the beginning. No, it was the original Murphy, and then it's like Murphy regains his memories and becomes more human again, and he says something like, "My friends call me Murphy, you can call me RoboCop," and because before then he was just like a machine, but then like memories of his life with his wife and his children or child sort of came back to him, and he became more human.
Well, I guess before we do any kind of review of the series, we should get Cynthia's thoughts on the episode if she has it.
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah, it's not. Yeah,
that's fair, but okay. Did you enjoy it? Were you like, oh my god, I can't believe I got to watch? You seemed to be enjoying it as you were watching it.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it a lot, quite a lot. Actually, wanted to rewatch it. I think there was a lot that I didn't hear. I wasn't hearing what they were saying very well, so it's in some of the points in the show. But overall, yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, it is quite a dense. Like the plot is quite convoluted.
It's another one of those, like we said before, like that a show like this that's episodic, like you don't necessarily need to watch from the beginning. However, there are some episodes that are better than others in terms of introducing people to it, and this is probably not the best episode to do that because it doesn't really follow the formula of most of them, other than the fact that they're sort of halfway going undercover, and the fact that they're portraying themselves as somebody they're not. But that was in most episodes. But
Are they? Wait.
Well, I mean, just in the fact that they pretended to be brother and sister and being interested in the and saying that he had a terminal disease and all that stuff. So
yeah, that was good.
Featured that sort of thing where they pretended to be a couple or various other characters in order to sort of get inside something or other.
Yeah, and he started to believe it.
Yeah, because most of the previous roles that they played, there wasn't something that required him to pretend to be different physically than he was. It was all sort of circumstance.
Who's him? The main character?
Yeah, Bobby Mann. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for instance, there was an episode where they were trying to bust someone who was harvesting human parts. So they had him pretending to be a guy who was interested in buying parts that were deficient in himself or whatever. But they didn't have him. I mean, other than that, which was sort of an internal thing, but he didn't talk about he didn't have to portray any kind of physical ailment that he was experiencing. It was just sort of other.
Yeah, because there was he had to do that thing with that sort of tick that he had to do, and I think he did that quite well. So
yeah, I enjoyed that. I think my general impression over the 9 episodes, I have to say that I think David Andrews did a good job of playing the character consistently. Like, he was very believable as being this guy. I don't think he wasn't over the top or just too much of a stereotype, like we were saying before. And I actually, when I thought about the show, not having seen it since back when it originally came out, I remembered him. I think I sort of imagined that he was a little bit more brash than he turned out to be. And as it turned out, he was confident, but I don't think he was. He definitely didn't come across like a Tom Cruise character, that thinks he knows everything about it. He was very. He was confident, but he's not super cocky about things.
I'd have rather seen him in those Tom Cruise movies than Tom Cruise.
I mean, so would I.
It's like
I'm not a fan of Tom Cruise, so when I say that, it's not a compliment.
I mean, we might as well say, well, what about when David Andrews was about 10 or 15 years younger? Where was he? He should have been, because he's a good actor.
Well, yeah, we've talked about that before. There's a lot of people that I don't understand why they didn't have a bigger career than they did, but I know that a whole lot of stuff goes into it, including some of the actors' choices themselves. Sometimes they simply just choose the wrong things and don't get on the things that end up being big hits. Epatha Mergerson, who plays the captain in this show, I mean, she was on several failed shows before she got the Law and Order gig, and then she was on there for 17 years. So sometimes it takes a while before you hit that gold. And for her, I think it was getting cast in a Dick Wolf show, because this was, and then she was on Law and Order in a guest role, and then got the permanent gig. So sometimes you get the attention of somebody doing something else and you end up in the right spot, but you can't always know who that's going to be.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you can trust the person, they're good, you get along with them, then you'll want to reuse them.
And obviously Dick Wolf shows did that a lot, because especially with the Law and Order shows, because they cast so many guest actors over the years because every episode had different people depending on the case. So they always had all of these guest actors, and they rotated quite a few of them coming back and playing other parts.
Also, some people, some actors and actresses that have got the talent, but they're not cut out to do a 20-episode series with those long hours, and they might get itchy feet, and so they need to know that they can do a long series.
But it makes me wonder because, I think about those people that were in the failed shows, and you think, well, if any of these had become hits, then they wouldn't have been available for the thing that eventually made them more well known. So
yeah,
interesting to think about.
Like some people have taken pilots and just for the check, and they didn't like it, and like with the
that's the other thing I was going to say with her is that this same year that she did Man and Machine, she was on she did a pilot called Moe's World, where she played the mother of the gimmick on that show was that the son had died, and he was basically like a sort of a ghost or spirit or whatever that sort of revisited his family, but anyway, it's interesting to know because they only aired the one episode of that, so I don't know where exactly they were going with it, how much they were going to play up the sort of supernatural aspects of it, because the first episode, the pilot, was very biographical and didn't focus as much on that. But anyway, but I thought at the time I was watching that, it would have been interesting if any of these things had taken off. But of course, she wasn't at the beginning of Law and Order. They had a different captain, and then she joined in the fourth season. So I guess either they wouldn't have recast or changed that role, or else they would have brought in a different woman. Because as I recall, the background on that was the network said they wanted them to hire more women, which is why they replaced 2 of the male actors with females at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had that with Homicide, where in real life there was only had one female detective.
Yeah,
the network
you had one female detective in the real Homicide unit who was very much an ISTP type of like the tough, like I want to be taken seriously and I want to be just one of the guys kind of thing. She did not want to be treated differently for being female. And then, of course, the Homicide actress, Melissa Leo, played it that way and then kept having the network people saying, oh, well, you need to dress her nicer and make her look prettier so that she's more attractive to the potential audience,
She did a good job when she pretended to be the cousin of Kay Howard. And almost unrecognizable playing that other character.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I remember right, that was one of those times where they even went so far as having a pseudonym guest actor that pretended it wasn't her.
Yeah.
Like they used to do with Anthony Ainley playing the master on Doctor Who.
That is silly. Like was it the anagrams?
Right.
Yeah. Was it something like Tremoli and always like the ones that would have say
Leon White.
Yeah. Yeah. Right, yes, it was about death. So, do we think, I think if it had come back for another series, would you have watched it?
Now I would. Back then, obviously, I don't know because I don't even remember whether I watched all the episodes. So it's possible that I lost interest in it even before it ended. But I also could have lost track of it because they moved the day of the week it was on. And as I think I said in a previous video, younger people, now that's like they sort of take for granted that things are on demand or they're accessible or they're much more promoted as to when the access to things. Whereas in those days, it was like if you had a TV show and you watched it on Friday nights, and then all of a sudden it wasn't on Friday night when you tuned in, well, you didn't necessarily know that they moved it to a different day. You might have just thought, well, they just don't have it anymore, or it's just not on the
Yeah.
feed.
Yeah, that's the problem. With
So I honestly don't remember whether I watched all the episodes or whether I was, upset that it was canceled or thinking I wanted to see more of it. I really don't remember.
They shouldn't move programs. They shouldn't.
I remember that my older brother, who was very much into sci-fi stuff, was a little bit disappointed that they didn't feature more of it. I remember that was his main complaint, because he thought there should have been more focus on the sci-fi aspects of the way Eve worked and those kind of things. Some of the stuff that they eventually explored with Data on Star Trek, so he, was able to enjoy that more because they spent more time talking about it. And I think he felt like this was a little bit too much they focused too much time on the cop show aspects of it, or the guest characters, not enough on the actual, like, Eve as the robot elements.
Yeah, I've had a similar tendency there as well. It's probably more INTP female with the.
And of course, I think at the time I probably lamented that they didn't have more scenes of her changing clothes.
Yeah, it should be a lot of random working out of like a robot doesn't need to work out, but the makers of the program wanted her in tight outfits. Yeah.
Right.
Right. So.
But that's it's definitely a show that they probably could remake today and then be more successful with it, as we've said, when in today's kind of setup where things are more on demand-ish, that it would be like promoted as something that people would watch a bunch of episodes. Even cable television channels, frequently I've noticed this just from looking at the listings, that they'll have a bunch of episodes of a particular show in a row, because that's like they're trying to cater to people who are viewing things that way through things like Netflix and stuff like that. They're saying, okay, well, you could be streaming this show and watching 9 episodes in a row. Well, instead of that, watch our cable channel and watch the 9 episodes in a row of this. So everything is sort of promoted that way of so-called binge watching, instead of actually like watching an episode and then waiting a week to see the next one. So what I'm doing is I watch shows from 92 is the opposite. I'm doing it like it was originally broadcast and not watching multiple episodes a week unless they actually were aired that way to begin with. I think I tend to get burned out on a show faster maybe than some people do, but and to me there's sort of an added bonus to, like, I like part of what adds to the suspense of something, if it is an actual continuing story, is to have that period of waiting a little bit. And so that's why when I watch the Doctor Who old shows, it is better to watch like one episode a night, at least, no more frequent than that, because if you start watching a bunch in a row, then it loses sort of that element of the what will happen next time, because his next time is like 2 minutes instead of a day or a week.
And I think especially with sitcoms where you've got you've got some less deep characters.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody can watch
like
10 episodes of a sitcom in a row or something, because that just seems like would get really tiresome.
Oh yeah, especially with the characters that are like the broader characters. There's sort of more caricatures.
Yeah, the more formulaic shows where the same thing happens basically, and it's the only thing that changes is like sort of the setup for the same jokes. It's like, I don't know why somebody would want to see that over and over again in a short period of time. To me, the time to see a show like that is as comic relief. It's like your life is stressful, or you've been, or even your entertainment has just been too dramatic, or things that are way too serious. Oh, well, I feel like laughing at something. Well, you put on something, you laugh for half an hour, and then you're good. Whereas you don't need to, I'll watch 8 more episodes of that.
Yeah, I just think that unless the characters are interesting, yeah, you can, like, the audience, and I've got this book. Now that's funny, comedy writers on comedy writing. It came out in 1998. You might not know most of these. You'll know some of these, Jeff.
I can't actually see.
I'll just
But,
I'll just change it.
yeah, I was gonna say if you put it on.
You'll know a few.
Well, I saw Michael Palin. I know who he
Yep.
is, obviously, but
yeah, Richard Curtis.
that's the only Michael Palin's the only name I'm sure of. I think I've heard the name Spike Milligan, but I don't really remember who he is.
Yeah, and then Johnny Spate. He created In Sickness and Health. Till Death Us Do Part, which became.
I know Alan Simpson, but it's probably not the same guy. I'm thinking of the former senator from Wyoming. So
yeah, but again, because that would come up in Sanford and Son episode, based on Steptoe and Son, created by Ray Galton and Alan Simpson. So that became Sanford and Son. Johnny Spates, in Till Death Us Do Part, became All in the Family.
anyway, as far as, like I said, I thought David Andrews was consistent in his portrayal of Mann. I think Nancy Butler did a good job too. I said there were certain episodes where she seemed to play up the robotic aspects of her personality a little bit more, but that may have been direction or she was only 22 at the time when she did it. I don't think it was any lack of acting skills on her part. I just think it was sometimes she was a little bit more that way than others. But I guess my overall feeling is that they did sort of miss an opportunity in that it seems like, and I don't know how much of this is some of these aspects. It could be, like I said, we're watching on quality that isn't the best.
Yeah.
But the show had sort of a dark feel to it. And I don't know how much of that is the lighting and other things, or whether it was the way they intended it. And they sort of had this idea of the future being, resources were kind of scarce in various ways. I know the early 90s, there was the first, kind of period of time where there was a whole lot more like environmental awareness, and people were trying to be like, well, we've got to conserve energy. And so there are aspects of that woven into it, but they never really pursued it, except maybe in the water episode. That the water everywhere was really the only one where they really kind of made that the focus of the episode. But there's a lot of sort of references to things. In this last episode, there was the Michael Jackson reference, because basically he had him. They talked about him as if he was Elvis, because he says, I saw him when he was all puffed up on his last tour of Vegas or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same. They're kind of implying that Michael Jackson had the same end to his life that Elvis did, which is partially true. I mean, he did die younger than a lot of people, but not as young as Elvis. But so the date was kind of all over the place, because there was at least one episode where they implied that it was around now, like it was like 2020 or 20. And then in this episode, they make some reference to 2009. So they didn't seem to be able to make up their mind quite when they wanted to set this. And so if they were going to do that, then they kind of needed to not have any specific year references. Instead, they would occasionally throw things out in a sort of awkward way. Yeah. And then they'd have things like the kid playing with the Sega Game Gear, but not having any kind of line about it being a retro gaming system,
Yeah, or the thing with the plot where you had two of the people, they came from Romania, and they mentioned Ceausescu.
It seems like that would have been a little too far back for there to be somebody who was young enough, or still young enough that would have been active in that time. But
it was in the news, and it was topical.
Yeah. So obviously they had a tough job at the time in trying to write something set in the future and make these guesses about how things would be and what things would be remembered. So you had some of them. I think they knew at the time, this will be a funny reference in the future if it ends up not being the case. Things like saying Wayne's World 5 and stuff like that. It's like these are guesses about what could happen that are kind of tongue-in-cheek even when they're put in there, because we obviously don't know whether these are going to come true, but they'll amuse people in today, and maybe even more so later.
So when I was talking about, because I talked to Cynthia about this before, where in this show you've got about 2.5 characters in terms of your main cast, and I was wondering how quickly would you end up repeating yourself with Eve in terms of the lessons that she would be learning if you've got like 20 episode seasons. And
yeah, I don't know. I feel like if you and I had put our minds to it, we could probably come up with some plots that would make the show stay interesting.
Yeah, I would want to. If I was running the show, part of me would like, I want to have other detectives in it just to give me options.
Yeah, that's definitely something missing. And even Law and Order, that always focused on a main detective team, they would still have the other detectives throw in a line or two from time. They would have sort of interaction with them where they weren't just background people walking around. Like they would actually have some interaction and sometimes names, where it wasn't just the two were like the only ones that ever interacted.
I mean, say Homicide was just Pemberton and Bayliss for 5 seasons, and is there enough material there to have 100 episodes of just them?
I mean, I think there is, just because they're good and the writers were good, but I still think it's better that it was an ensemble. And there was some push from that because Andre Braugher was sort of the breakout star of the show. The network wanted more Pemberton, and they had to actually sort of fight to have the other characters more involved and not have the focus always be Pemberton.
Yeah, because that's like with the thing I'm working on, like why I changed the name of the channel. It's like the more characters you have, the more options you have. And I was thinking about science fiction shows in the 1990s, and the main cast would be about 8, 9, or 10. And I think there was 9 was the main cast on Homicide. I think it was 8 detectives plus Giardello. And it seems like you need that number of main characters when it's an American series. And I remember when Graham Linehan was saying about the IT crowd. Some people call it the IT crowd, some people call it the IT crowd. But it was originally called the IT crowd because it was a pun on that. And that had basically a main cast of about 4. But Graham Linehan said, well, if that was going to be an American series, you did about 6 of them in the basement because you've got more episodes.
You can do 2 main characters effectively, but you have to have consistently good guest characters. I think of something like Quantum Leap, because they had 2 main characters that were the only consistent ones in every episode. But they always had the other characters were good playing off of them, and that was what made the show stay interesting. Because if it had been the entire thing was the interaction between those 2 characters, then that would have gotten boring quickly. But the fact that
it's like you guys are talking. This is funny.
Yeah, and plus it's like the setting would change every story. Yeah, I was just like trying not to interrupt Jeff, but just giving a little signal there.
Signal of what?
That I had something to say, but I've forgotten about it now because I try not to interrupt.
Okay.
I was just saying, but there was that thing with Quantum Leap where, although it was that main character, like the setting changed every week, and it was sort of half a new character because he was another person. So it was like he had to play a different part of him. So it was like not quite just one character every week because it's like him in another role. There's a little bit of a change and a different spin on it.
Right.
Like when he had to.
But he was still always the same character. It's funny because you and I have talked about this before, where I've talked about how, when I did role playing on the internet, just, in my spare time, just sort of pretending to be people, but basically being myself just in different circumstances. And honestly, that's sort of what Sam Beckett, the Quantum Leap character, is, because he's always himself in the circumstances of another person.
Right.
So it's like he has to change the way he reacts to things based on the person that he's inhabiting, but his basic instinct is always to respond the way that he would himself because he's himself.
So it also might be the kind of stories that one is telling, in that if you have got the same, it's like with Doctor Who, where, like, say when it was Tom Baker and you had like 42 episodes, well, 42 stories that were just him, but it's a different setting every story, and there's those other elements and the kinds of, like, if you were telling a story that was very much character based, you would run out after you would, and it was like you would run out of material if to just mine a particular character. You can, it depends how well it's written. Like, if it's a character's point of view, and the character's point of view can be so unique that can carry on in so, like with Munch, that it could just carry on over so many episodes, hundreds of episodes in his case. I just think that I'm in the same mind as you. Look, when you got an ensemble, you've just got more options.
Yeah, and obviously the more consistent you are with the characters, the better. And ideally, in any TV show, you have writers that can write both plot and dialogue, but you at least got to have one of the two for the show to have any quality at all. And I've said before, like, I'm much better at writing dialogue than I am at writing plot. So if I was going to create an actual show for production, I would need to have somebody who was a strong plot writer along with me in terms of the story elements of it. I trust myself to write characters well in terms of the things they would say and how they would react to things. Because I feel like if you just gave me like a template of characters, you said, okay, here's these 6 characters, here's their backgrounds, where I feel like I could take those characters and you give me the situation and what is thrown at them, I can tell you what they would say in response or what they would do. But I wouldn't be as good at coming up with the ideas of what they should actually be doing, like what the setting should be, where they should be going, like what should move the plot along.
Yeah.
Whereas there's some people that are exactly the opposite. They're good at writing stories of action and things happening, but then the characters start talking to each other, and you're watching it like, this is the stupidest dialogue I've ever heard. You know?
And it's
so
like
they needed to have somebody who could write character dialogue, and they didn't.
Yeah, and you can say from a sort of a function point of view or Kersey intellect point of view, it's pulling on different skill set of the writer. Like, as you said, the person who can get the plot right, all of the thinking of the logic and getting all of that, like, well, if they do this, they do, and making it make sense and having a nifty plot. Versus, and then the characterization things where you're more going in towards the feeling side of things.
And then you have, like we've talked about with somebody like Terry Nation, where he was really good on coming up with conceptual ideas and sort of having confrontational dialogue between characters. Like, he liked these kind of showdown scenes, but he was not nearly as good at, like, the coherence of why they would be doing these things, like to put them in sort of the practical side of why these things would be set up that way.
But that said, he did come up with Avon, and he did come up with.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is he was good at creating characters, and putting them in situations where they got to face off with each other, and he was good at coming up with, you know, ideas about what sort of the concept that would be explored. But then it was the practical elements of sort of the plot moving that I was talking about that he could have been better with.
Although he did write, I think he wrote Countdown, which is maybe your favorite episode.
Yeah. So I'm just picking on him in terms of I'm looking at like sort of those weaknesses I was talking about. And so to bring it back to Man and Machine, I think that they were stronger on the characterization and dialogue than they were on the plot. The plots, as we've said, did get somewhat repetitive, and sometimes it was just sort of like stock villain that we're sort of creating that doesn't really, you know, have a strong motivation, or they're just not particularly interesting and we're spending too much time on them. You know, that was probably the weaknesses of Man and Machine more than anything, was that they probably came up with what you were saying, like the lesson Eve was supposed to learn. They probably came up with that kind of thing and were like, okay, how can we explore that? and then tried to sort of form a story around that. And I don't know how much. The actual other writers on the show were like coming up with plot ideas. I don't know who was saying, well, here's the I want to focus more on the police aspects or other things. I don't know how much give and take there was on that. But my guess would be that they probably spent more time talking about how can we put our characters in a position where they can play off each other, and about sort of Mann teaching Eve certain things, so that would be my guess, and that sometimes that's included more than others.
I mean, when it is this idea we were talking about, like sometimes you can have a main character and they do a load of episodes, but we don't really find out that much about the character because the episodes aren't about that. It's like with the Doctor. How much did we really find out about the Doctor, say the Fourth Doctor, in those 42 stories? Well, the stories weren't that much about. Now, Douglas Adams wanted to do a story about the Doctor going into retirement, and he didn't want to save people anymore, but then he got dragged back into it. And Graham Williams, the then producer, thought it would send the series up too much. But Douglas Adams, the way he wrote in the book, Doctor Who, The Unfolding Text, it's like, it was almost like all or nothing. It was like, he wasn't interested in character, or if you're going to do character, I want to be very interested in the precise motivations of the characters. And he couldn't, and he thought it was very boring because it was outside of his own personality. Because I think he was very much a Seven. Like he was completely uninterested in the Master's motivation of controlling the universe. To him, that didn't seem real.
And to me, the when a story was interesting or when a setup was interesting, the letdown would be when they had to come up with a way for it not to happen. And the problem with that is that when you get my brain going with, oh, this idea is a really like exciting sounding idea, and then you're like, well, we can't have that happen for these reasons, so then we have to find some way out of it. That to me is always a letdown. So like the story where at the end the Master is telling the Doctor, we should go on the run together from the Time Lords because together they wouldn't be able to fight us off both. I'm always intrigued by those kind of scenes, and I root for them. So the same thing happened with the new Star Wars when when Kylo is like, join me instead of and I'm like, yeah, they should have done that instead of the actual story. Like it would have been better, So when they set up ideas like that, where I'm like, the so-called good and evil characters working together, they always have to come up with some reason why the good character says no to it, and it's never as interesting as if they had.
I know they could at least have done one story, even if it was just a two-parter. Yeah. Just do it.
Right. If you want to have them flame out, because the whole point is, well, they don't work well together, or something goes wrong with this. Well, then great, but go ahead and do it, and then have it happen, and then you're like, okay, then I can see why this didn't need to play out. Instead, they would like tease the audience with it, and then say, well, no, we can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, at least now there's more of this through line with a season, and I know they did that with The Key to Time and then Child of a Time Lord, which I won't go into, but and this is something, Cynthia, that Jeff and I frequently bring up with Jeff, and that is, and Jeff mentioned early on, that viewing habits, the way people consume series has just changed so much, where before it would be episodic, and then there was a series in the 1990s called, except for soaps, which are completely serialized, right, and they get away with it. And I was thinking that maybe you couldn't do that in science fiction in the way it was consumed, because it's too many ideas to keep in your head over a long time for the casual viewer. But maybe when it's what I sort of mean is, like, if you had a science fiction thing that was like a soap, that was heavily serialized, and people weren't able to catch up, I think it would be harder to keep up with all of the ideas, because the ideas would keep building on each other and people would get lost. But when it's a soap set in contemporary society, It's like you can miss an episode and still able to sort of catch up. So that's my thoughts on that. And because what happened with Babylon 5 is J. Michael Straczynski decided to do the television equivalent of a 5-novel series. And he said that each season would be like a big, thick novel. 5 of those, one story. He spent 5 years working out the arc plot of this 5-season story. And then Star Trek copied Babylon 5, because there was also that stuff about the space station series with Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5, and they started to develop an arc plot as well in Deep Space Nine. But what happened was, and the ratings for Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5 weren't that good. And people thought, oh, this is the problem if you have a complex serial with 5 arc plots over many years. It's not great for casual viewers. They're not able to catch up. You're just writing for the dedicated fans who then love it. And then what happened is, when it came out on DVD, those people that really bought into the series, so in other words, long story short, serialized shows with strong serial elements of continuing storylines sell better on DVD. Those which are more episodic, where you can watch the episodes out of order, they'd have better ratings at the time, but don't sell as well on DVD. And so then, as DVD sales became more important, they decided to make series more episodic. And then when all this like streaming stuff came in, where people could watch, and also with DVDs, people would buy the box sets and that. And then when the streaming services, like, then people could keep up with the plots. And so the writers probably wanted to do what they always wanted to do, which is to have this strong serial element. And I recently finished a series that was only 6 parts, but I think it was good. And that was Loki. Yeah, so there's a lot more serial elements these days, because with the serial element, people get more into the show, and then they're more likely to buy like the DVDs and Blu-rays and really get committed into it.
Yeah, and I just think in general, I enjoy that more. I enjoy a continuing story, actual character development, as opposed to the characters seeming like they just restart every episode exactly the same. And there's exceptions to that. There's shows that comedy shows especially, that I still enjoy, where nobody seems to ever develop. Even, things like The Simpsons, which, of course, is animated so that they can have the same characters that never age for years and years. And it gives them the ability to keep using plots that apply to the characters at the same age. And then, of course, after a while, they started making fun of the fact that they did that. Yeah, certain limited characters did age, and then other ones didn't, and they made fun of the fact that they were still the same age.
What was that joke that you said about Bart Simpson? And he said, "Oh, you came back 5 years ago when I was." What was that joke? When I was 10.
Yeah, he's still 10, and he said, "Wait a minute, when I was 10." They just keep going, but yeah. But that always makes me think of the episode where they refer back to the Who Shot Mr. Burns story, that the fact that Maggie was the one that shot Mr. Burns, and Homer goes, "I thought Smithers did it." And Lisa goes, "That would have made a lot more sense." So, yeah, a show has to be able to make fun of itself that way, too. But
I think I remember Matt Groening saying that one of the reasons he wanted to do it as a cartoon is that he would be able to get more meta, more parodic as a cartoon than as a real life thing, and that the audience is more likely to accept that.
But the funny thing about that was, he wanted the actual physical elements of the characters and stuff to be realistic.
Yeah.
Like the kind of Looney Tunes, somebody gets killed with an anvil and pops up alive the next scene. He wanted those things to be realistic. And so the thing that made him the most angry, at least in the early years, was when the producers would deviate from that and have things that were like more cartoonish that couldn't happen in real life, like a big fish jumping out of the water and winking at the camera and stuff like that. Like he couldn't stand those things. So on the commentaries, he always
expresses that he would be upset when they did those things. But.
Right. Right. So we mentioned about character development. What do we think of Eve's character development in this series?
Well, like we said before, it's hard over 9 episodes. I think they missed an opportunity that they could have. Again, if it had been more serialized, if they kind of referred back to more of the things that happened in previous cases or previous episodes, you could have seen more of that. I think could have said, well, now because of this, I know this better or something. But instead, because it sort of had each episode in a way starts from scratch, they didn't have a lot of that. So you really couldn't see the development much over time.
Yeah, and plus there is that thing of it's marketed as a detective show. People are mostly tuning in for a detective series, and we'll get maybe the sci-fi audience as a bonus.
I don't even know if that's the case. Like I said, the way it was promoted it was mainly stylistically, it's a futuristic thing, but there's action scenes. And the main cast is attractive, and there's some more action. But again, that's the network promotion. I don't know whether the producers that's what they were aiming for or not. So I don't know how much the behind the scenes discussion was. What direction do we most want to go with this? But it did seem like it was more of a cop show with sci-fi elements than a sci-fi show with cop elements.
Yeah. So was the Sci-Fi Channel around in 1992?
Not yet, but almost. It came about. I think it was in development. I remember reading because I read the Tribune archives, and I remember it was like the same because the same company had both that and the Cartoon Network, I believe, and the Comedy Central, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, like the Cartoon one came first, first Comedy Central, then Cartoon Network, and I think Sci-Fi was the following year. So I think it was 93, if I remember right.
Right. Do you think it would?
The dates wrong.
Do you think it would have done better if it, say, debuted on the Sci-Fi Channel?
I mean, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to know.
Because even with that, good series have been cancelled.
So it was 92. I just looked it up. September 24th, 92 was when the Sci-Fi Channel came on the air. So, and it's NBC Universal company.
So did you say September? When did it come on?
September 24th of 92 was the
right. Okay. So what NBC could have done is they could have said, "Okay, we're not going to do the second season on NBC, but we could do it on this new Sci-Fi Channel."
Yeah, if I recall, I think in the real early days, I can't even remember if they had any actual originally produced shows when they first started,
right?
Or whether it was all reruns of stuff, previous or movies or things like that. And I don't honestly remember how long it was before they started actually making original programming, whether they actually did that at the beginning or whether that didn't come along until later. But anyway, I agree. There was already precedent for that in America, in fact, because the show The Days and Nights of Molly Dodd was a show that started on NBC, and then they moved it to Lifetime and made new episodes. And then there were also ones that started network and went syndication. They did that with Baywatch. Of course, it's also started NBC, and then they became syndicated and became a hit as a syndicated show. So there were already some success stories of shows that did that very thing. So, I think they probably could have brought it back on the Sci-Fi Channel if it had been properly promoted. And maybe if that had happened, the creative team would have had more license to focus on more of the sci-fi elements and say, look, we're still going to keep the setting and the characters, but we're going to spend more time on that than we did previously.
Oh, definitely, because they know their audience.
Right.
It's going to be, they want the sci-fi elements, which is why, so I can name three series which I personally liked. Well, one I'm a bit iffy on, but Caprica, which was the prequel to Battlestar Galactica, that got cancelled after one series. That might have got cancelled because there wasn't enough action in it, and I liked the crime element involved in it with the Halathar. And then The Expanse was cancelled. So these are 3 series on Sci-Fi that were cancelled because of low ratings. Caprica, The Expanse was cancelled after season 3, but that season 3 was a pretty boring season. And then it came back. Then Jeff Bezos bought it, and they did season 4 and 5 on Amazon for The Expanse. And then a series I like called Krypton, about Superman's grandfather, Seg-El. That ran for 2 series, and again, that was cancelled. Low ratings. And I think you said, Jeff, that you don't want to watch a new series in case it gets cancelled. You want to know that it's been around for a while.
I pretty much adopted that policy at the mid-2000s because I had just gotten tired of too many times where I had gotten interested in something and then it was canceled. There was one, speaking of sci-fi thing, it was another show that combined sort of realism and sci-fi, and I always forget the title because it was like really not a very attention-grabbing title. So I always think it was like Now and Then, but I'm not sure that's actually what it was called.
That's not a good title. I agree with Robert McKee that the title should tell you what genre it is.
Now and Then is a coming-of-age story, right?
Yeah, what I'm talking about was maybe it's Now and Again. No.
Just in general, I like the Robert McKee.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But the show I'm talking about they only lasted a few episodes, but it had a really cool concept and I enjoyed it. And basically the idea was that this guy was sent back to the past, and he didn't know exactly why. It wasn't like Quantum Leap where he had somebody telling him, here's why you're here. But he used it as an opportunity to try to change things he thought needed to be changed in order for the future to be better. But what happened was it was only a temporary thing. He would change things in the past and then he would go back to where he came from. And then things were all messed up, like based on what he had done. So then it was like he went back to try to fix it again. So he kept going back and forth. And I don't know, maybe it would have gotten boring over a period of time, but in those like 3 or 4 episodes where they showed, it really hooked me. I was like, this is a really cool thing because it sort of turned on its head all of those things like Back to the Future and other things that had these things before, because nothing was exactly how you would anticipate. Like it would sort of set up things where like, okay, he's trying, because for one thing, it was almost entirely selfish. And most of those things, you have this idea of this altruistic thing where the character is trying to change the future for the better. And his focus was mainly on, he wanted this girl to like him, and so he wanted to be with her in the future. And so he did things to try to make that happen, and then something else always ended up happening instead. But it wasn't played just for complete comedy like it was some, like a Simpsons Halloween episode where Homer kept going back and forth after changing the future. It had elements of that, but it was dramatic enough, like they tried to make it realistic. So it would be these elements where it was like he was learning. So it was a little bit like the movie Groundhog Day, in that it was like every time he went back to this same thing, he learned something that helped him sort of do it differently the next time, but then he still couldn't get it perfect, because it was like the idea that, and this has always been a concept that fascinates me, is that you don't understand just how many people that you impact. Like nothing happens in a vacuum, and every decision you make, you think, oh, this affected me. Maybe it affected 1 or 2 other people, but you don't realize how many people are affected, even just a little bit, by everything that you end up doing in some context. So he kept exploring that concept because he'd go back to the future, and then there'd be something that he had absolutely no idea would be affected by it, in a way that he didn't expect. So it would always be like these little elements where he'd have to like figure out what changed. And then he was like, oh man, that wasn't what I was trying to do. And then he was like, okay, next time I have to do this and this. So it was this intricate kind of thing where it sounds like a simple concept, but there was all these other elements involved.
Oh yeah. There's a series that's got a different premise, but I somehow think you might quite like it. Did you ever watch the series Sliders? It was about
no, not really. I mean, maybe clips of it, and some people told me about it, but I never actually really watched it.
Yeah, these like parallel realities, and I think you might like that. But one never knows with Jeff. Do you like science fiction, Cynthia?
Yes.
What are your favorite science fiction shows?
I can't think of any right now. I do like it, and it's just nothing's coming to mind when I yeah.
That's all right. So yeah, Eve. So yeah, I just think that
That Was Then was the name of the show that I was describing.
Right.
I always forget the name of it because it's, like you said, it's not a good title. It's not an attention-getting title, which is probably one of the reasons why it failed. But,
yeah. Yeah, it's like when you hear it, it's like, what genre is that?
Yeah, right. It doesn't really.
It's like if you're a sci-fi fan, and like in those days, and you're looking through the paper, you want something in the title that will tell you that it's science fiction. Like, get a star in there.
Yeah, and we talked about the little IMDb one-line descriptions of what happened in the Man and Machine episodes. Well, of course, this whole entire series have blurbs on there too that say what they're about. The one for That Was Then, the description says it talks about what was then.
Oh, that's bad. So I might try that out. I might try that out, Jeff, because what you've told me sounds interesting.
Apparently, they made 7 episodes and only aired 2 of them. I thought it was at least 3, but this is description is saying 2 episodes were aired and then it was canceled.
Would you be interested in watching it again if I sort of like was able to hunt it out?
If you could find that, definitely. I don't know that. Good luck on that one because it seems like one of those would be very hard to find. Like I said, especially considering only 2 episodes aired. So, but if I could ever see even though I'm sure it ended on a cliffhanger after the 7th episode, it would still be fun to see those if that I never saw originally.
Ooh,
yeah, and the funny thing is the only way I was able to find it was the only actor I remember from the show by name is Bess Armstrong. I remember she played the mother of the guy, and the main thing that I had seen her on previously was the show My So-Called Life, where she was also the mother of the main character. So,
is that the full title? That was then?
Yes.
What year?
2002. Originally aired on ABC.
2002. Right. Okay.
Yeah, but that the reason I thought of that was it was just one of those shows in a period of time where I got tired of being hooked by something and then it was canceled right away. So I just was like, you know what, I'm not going to invest any more of my emotional energy into these new shows. I'm just going to watch old things I already know are good and some old things I never saw. So that's kind of been, as you know, my focus lately is that I don't just watch those shows that I watched back then. In like, for instance, now I'm in 92. I'm not just watching the things that I know I saw the first time. I'm also watching things that I either don't remember or I'm pretty sure I didn't watch back then. I'm at least giving them a chance. You know, obviously, if it ends up being really boring, I don't keep watching it. But there's definitely some things I've given a chance that I know I didn't at the time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I will look for that on. I'll do my best.
Well, while you're on the subject of things you probably won't be able to find, you and I before talked about the first episode of the show, The Heights, and it was like blocked in every country.
Yeah,
I think it's probably still. I think it's because the title of the episode is the same as the song, and that's what's causing it to be blocked. That's my viewpoint. I don't know that for sure, but if you can ever locate that.
I tried. I tried different various means with VPNs and different locations, and it still didn't work.
So far I haven't been able to find that
stops.
anywhere else. Every other episode, but not the first one, because the title is the same as the song. But how do you talk to an angel?
Yeah, I pulled out all the stops. Maybe somebody out there who's got a paid VPN might be able to change it to the location.
This random shot in the dark. If you have the first episode of the TV show The Heights from 1992, we need you.
Yep. And now that you're on 1992, we're going to be going back to reviewing Kappa 2.
Yep.
And when we've got one more episode from 1990, and then we have Kappa 2, which was made in 1992.
Yep. So I'm torn again on the Man and Machine, the score for the last episode.
Yeah.
I wish I had the ending because I think that might affect my score a little bit. But overall, I'll guess I'll be generous and give it a 7. It's another one of those kind of somewhere in between 6 and 7.
Yeah. I think I'll give it a 7 as well. It sort of went quickly. Of course, I did watch it in good company. I watched it with Cynthia. So,
well, did you have any other overall thoughts on the series you wanted to say, Ben, before we wrapped it up? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there's that through line of I'm more interested in the effect of the plot on Eve than on the actual plots themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were some interesting ones with, like, some of the episodes were good lessons for her, and just the one with the baby I thought was well done. And then also in the first episode where she sort of makes a mistake, but that was a little bit contrived, that first episode, but it's still interesting with her sort of this sort of like development within each episode.
I'd have to go back and check to make sure as far as what I gave my highest score to, but off the top of my head, I think my favorite episode was the Water Everywhere episode. And the two main reasons I think that one stood out were that we had a guest character that was interesting, that wasn't exactly a good guy or a bad guy. He was more of a just kind of self-motivated character that was entertaining. And we had something where Eve actually had to use her abilities to figure something out that probably Mann wouldn't have figured out on his own. So her intellect solved something that helped turn the case. It wasn't just her physical ability. So those two elements, I think, made that story stand out as being better than a lot of the other ones.
Yeah, that little guy, that character and that actor, yeah, he was good.
Yeah, and even the villains, they had their motivations made sense, and it was a little bit of a twist because you weren't sure exactly who was working with who and how it was going to turn out. It wasn't quite as telegraphed as some of the episodes were, where you knew right off the bat who the bad guy was, and it was just sort of a matter of how it was going to play out. And that one, it was a little bit more of a mystery, and there was a little bit of a sort of a double bluff in terms of the way it played out. So all those elements made it much more interesting than sort of the formulaic thing.
So I've got a question for you, Cynthia. What do you give it out of 10?
Well, being as I can't really, well, am I comparing it to everything in its genre, or am I just overall quality?
The way I always do it is I just say what my overall enjoyment level was, but obviously.
Okay. I mean, I enjoyed it pretty thoroughly, but then again, I might say 8 a little bit. I liked it quite a lot, but no. I like the diversity of the characters. That was entertaining, and I liked.
Oh, interestingly, what do you mean by the diversity of the characters?
Yeah, I guess I like that there's a robot fembot in it, and then I like that there is the female that I guess you guys call her. What did you say? ISTP?
Yeah.
Oh, Mikey.
Yeah.
Yeah, the maintenance girl.
I thought that was kind of comedic relief or something in a way. Her character a little bit. I'm trying to remember all the characters. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting, that aspect to where Eve said about the police that we have a public relations problem. I think today's news would back that up.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Sorry.
Well, we can't really go into
in recent years. There's been a lot of attention focused on police in terms of their procedures and a lot of things that people used to have an attitude of, well, the cops protect us, so some of the things they do that aren't necessarily by their book were less scrutinized than they are today. So I think, it probably goes beyond a public relations problem, but it's definitely one of the aspects of it.
Right. Yeah, we can't go too much into that, Cynthia, because like Peter Schiff can't talk about a certain thing because he lost an advertiser because of something related to police. So yeah, an advertiser.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Ben doesn't want to lose his advertisers, his big sponsors.
No, just no, because like little channels get cancelled a lot easier than bigger channels.
Really, you think so?
Yeah, because
I would think it would be the other way around, but maybe it's just most people don't notice.
Yeah, but it's like when it's a really big channel and it's earning quite a bit of money for Google.
Well, yeah, I can see that. Slide. But it also gets more negative attention. So it seems like with the smaller channels, much more often when they get canceled, it's based on copyright strikes and things like that, as opposed to actual content. Yeah. The other thing they do is that what I learned from somebody who was talking about it is that if your channel is sort of put in a category of this is the type of content you do, and then you start doing something else. In other words, like what you were saying about, making things unlisted for subscribers is sort of a separate thing. But basically, YouTube's own algorithm, it's like your video will not show up in the usual places it does if it's determined to be a different category than what your channel is in. Yeah. So it's basically like YouTube is like, well, you're not an authority on this subject, therefore people don't need to see that as much. And it's funny to see that with channels that have a lot of subscribers, that when there's a video that the title is something very different than the typical stuff they do, it has a lot less views. And so it follows up that it would be like, because the usual algorithm that where it gets put, it wasn't put in those places. It didn't show up in the related videos.
I wonder what the algorithm thinks of my titles. Because
well, that's the thing. If you ever titled a video like 1 or 2 words without a bunch of parentheses and other stuff like that, you'd probably be like, what is this? This can't be Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I tried a different titling system on, it's like, I try to get the keywords in there. It's just that they're shown. It's about the click-through rate. You got to get a click-through rate really above, because the higher the click-through rate, the more impressions that you get, which is where they sort of like show a thumbnail of the video. And then when you get the click-through rate, you got to get the audience retention. And so if you have a video like that, then it will get shown. So for instance, the Dario Nardi interview I did, that gets a lot of views. That's got thousands of views, but I need more videos like that. Yeah. So hopefully if I end up putting that sitcom on, it will get the views. Wilma's Housemate with Jeff as Hawk Miller in one episode.
This one?
Yeah, Wilma's House. Wilma's Housemates. That's why I changed the name of the channel.
So are you talking about the sitcom as an actual like a video production?
Yeah, because I know.
I wasn't sure if you meant like just an audio, like a voice performance.
No, it's a little video production, but it's like thinking about doing things of like, because she has access to the gear, and it's like, and thinking very much, a lot of it would be again based in a house, and like, and just, and you like, if you put your mind to it, you can think of things with budgets of like a zero budget, and because these days it's about, you know, if you got access to people and people like the writer, and then but I'm working on what I'm doing at the moment. It's like what you were saying about the characters and the plots. It's like I'm working on the 8 main characters, and I'm going through a very lengthy process to make sure that I know the characters really in depth, because then that will make writing them a lot easier. And also, as I create the characters super in depth, I'll be coming up with just list various plots that I could do in future. And I've got the first series planned out, but it's only 6 episodes, and I've got like continuing plots and things, and it's got a bit of a sci-fi element in it and a bit of a paranormal element in it. There. Right then. But
well, thank you for watching and reviewing Man and Machine with me, because it was fun to see it again. Yeah. I really remembered very little about it from when I saw it the first time. So.
That's all right, and then we can, and hopefully Cynthia can come back for when we resume Kappa 2, and we can sort of watch the episodes and sort of like get.
Yeah. Now, if you were going to do that, Cynthia, I would recommend watching all the ones that we've seen. Yeah. You know, because, and they're not as long as this. They're like half the length, 20-something minutes. Yeah. Because it really is a continuing story. So it makes a lot more sense if you see it from the beginning. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys for bringing me on. I know I didn't have much input this time, but I hope next time.
That's okay.
Neither did us. We have to sort of digress onto other things.
Well, like I said, if you want to be part of the Cap 2 thing, if you watch those, then you kind of get caught up with where we are. Then it'll probably be easier to have comments to say about it.
Okay. So Cynthia gives it 8. I'll give it 7, and Jeff gives it 7.
Well, that's not a final. I'd have to think.
Yeah. No, it's set in stone. You're on paper now.
Right then. So I'm going to end the broadcast.
All right. See you next time.
Yep. And next time should be Kappa 2.
Yeah.
Episode 7 of Series 1.
How's that spelled? Kappa 2? KAPATOO or O or U?
I will write it in a comment, and I will put it on screen, and then I will end the broadcast. Yeah, like that. All right.
So are you saying that?
Why is it? Oh yeah, okay.
Are you saying that you changed your channel name to that with the Wilma?
Yes, that is my new channel name. Yeah.
I never can stand these channel name changers.
Yeah, but what it means is that's what I'm listed as officially on Google, because otherwise, because you told me there's certain people that went off YouTube when they changed the channel name to the name of the person on the account.
Oh, yeah.
So I've sort of subverted the system.
Well, yeah, I have too. Even just keeping my name, it's like grandfathered in, because now, like, if you start a YouTube channel now, it asks you for your first and last name. It doesn't say, what do you want your channel to be named?
Oh,
now, obviously there's people that, you know, they use something other than their real name, but if you start from scratch, that's what it asks you. That's what it defaults to the name of your channel if you don't put something else.
Yeah, you can always change it later on, but but not too quickly. Because I remember when I first people in real life do change their names, but are you sure?
They limit the number of times you can change it. So once you change it, there's like a certain amount of time you have to wait before you change it again. But so that's why with my basic SB Spaz channel, I'm like, I'm not going to change it, because if I do, I probably won't be able to put it back the way it is. So I'd rather just keep it that way, even though I'm sure that algorithm has gotten me, because it can't figure out what the hell my channel is. It's like all over the place.
Right, and so I will end the broadcast.
Oh, I thought we already did.